James Cleverly has today announced a crackdown on disruptive protests, with police in England and Wales to be given powers to arrest protesters who cover their faces and scale national monuments. Now, while the Home Office might be trying to bill these as new laws, these offences are already covered by existing legislation. So it's been left to the former Home Secretary Suella Braverman to come up with something new. She's called for ministers to be given the authority to totally ban some protests. Look, lots to go at here. I'm joined by former Prisons Minister Anne Widdecombe. Anne, thank you very, very much. Is Braverman right? Should we be allowed to ban some protests, do you think?
I wouldn't want to ban any peaceful protest. We live in a democracy. I'm a great advocate of free speech. And if a protest is lawful and peaceful and notice has been given and all the rest of it, I really don't want to ban that sort of protest. And we have laws, as you've rightly said, to deal with the more disruptive type of protests. As far as I'm concerned, fine if what Rishi wants to do is to, if you like, clarify those laws and make it explicit rather than leaving it as implicit. I mean, for example, climbing public monuments is not an offence in itself, but obviously if it is, if it's an act of vandalism. So he wants to make things explicit. I have no problem with that. But my problem has been for some time now that the police have just not been sufficiently active.
Well, this is it, and I just don't know if this changes that. And let's take the face coverings one as an example.
Yeah.
OK, because, so, let's say on Saturday we have however many tens of thousands of people, as we have done every day for the last few months now, every weekend for the last few months, I should say, walking through London, face coverings. I mean, people can see some stuff in the video here. We're not going to arrest 10,000 people, are we?
No, and if 10,000 people had their faces covered, I think you would be absolutely justified in just banning the protest, just saying, that's it, I'm stopping it. I really think that would be justified. But if a dozen people have got face coverings, you arrest that dozen. But you do arrest them.
But this is the problem. They're not going to, are they?
No, because there's a shortage of police, there's a shortage of prison places, there's a shortage of custody places, because if you take somebody into the police station, you then have to process them. You know, it's not we don't live in a dictatorship. We don't just throw them straight into prison. You've got all the processes to go through, which take a huge amount of time. And really, this has been a problem now that's been accumulating over many, many years. I can remember when I was Shadow Home Secretary in 1999, making a speech about the burdens on the police and what we should be doing about it. We haven't done any of it.
No, we've not. And, here we are changing our laws in this country for something that is essentially to do with people protesting about a foreign issue on the streets of Britain. I think that speaks volumes about where we are. I'm just going to shift us on a bit because a couple of big stories I want to get your views on. So speaking to ITV last night, Rishi Sunak had some warm words for his former boss, Boris Johnson. Shall we have a look?
I mean, I'm proud of the work that we did together. I mean, we worked well together for a long time.
I noticed you didn't answer whether you'd have him back.
Well, I never talk about these personnel things, but look, I speak to him on an occasion. We
When did
worked
you last
well
speak to
together. I mean, I spoke to, I can't remember, right? Probably late last year.
What do you make of that then, Anne? Do you think that he should bring Boris back into his cabinet?
Look, I don't think whatever he does, I mean, Boris would be a much better bet than David Cameron, that's for a certainty. But I don't think whatever he does is going to make much difference now to Conservative chances at the next general election. They've completely blown it. They had a vast majority, so many opportunities, even given COVID. So many opportunities, and all they've done is fight each other. It's the age-old problem. You've got the officers brawling in the mess and the troops at action stations in the country, and eventually the troops just desert.
But they walked into a Labour trap, though. I mean, Labour wanted Boris out. Well, I think the Conservatives allowed the Labour Party to dethrone a sitting Prime Minister with a massive majority and widespread support in the Red Wall especially. And they just let them do that.
Yeah, well, they wouldn't have let them do it if they hadn't been so divided amongst themselves. I mean, that is the whole point. United we stand, divided we fall. We've got I've said this to you before, but you've got a really second-rate parliament. You've got people who panic. You've got people who have no sense of history and proportion, none at all. And therefore, that is why Labour is allowed sometimes to walk all over them.
Yeah, they are. I just think it will go down as one of the greatest soft coups ever. It will, seriously. The idea that they just allowed the Labour Party, essentially, to get rid of a guy who just won an absolutely stonking election. You just had to look at who was happiest when that happened, right? Who was happiest? The Labour Party will have been having champagne parties and all of this stuff, weren't they? But can we get your view, Anne, please, on as much as close to your heart, I think, is the Church of England being accused of helping migrants game the asylum system. Speaking a little bit earlier this week, there was a spokesperson for the Church of England who said, Abdul Azidi case is clearly shocking and distressing incident. Our thoughts and prayers are with those affected by it. But as we've said, it is ultimately the role of the Home Office to decide who comes into our country. Are you a bit let down by the Church of England, do you think?
Well, I left the Church of England because I already felt so let down, and that was in the 1990s. And they've just gone from bad to worse. But I would make this very serious point, that if somebody converts to Christianity and is baptised, that is a sacrament. And to actually give that sacrament, if you suspect that it's not genuinely required, that is sacrilege. That is sacrilege, and I make no apology for saying so.
What should the punishment be for that, do you think?
Well, I mean, in past times, you would have had the clergy courts. What they do now is shrug their shoulders, basically. Now, what's Welby got to say about this? I mean, this is all going on. He's hardly uttered a squeak.
Well, we've gone to the Church of England. I mean, I've gone to them, I think, 6 times in the last 48 hours, and they just keep sending me that statement. And no matter what I send them, they just keep sending me. They don't want to answer this.
No, they don't want to face up to what's been going on.
But
that's the problem.
Do you think, right, OK, is this naivety or is it politically motivated? Because there is a scoop coming a little bit later on in this show, actually, with Alison Pearson. It's on an issue as this. Yeah, they are clearly now giving in to pressure. The idea that if you do not baptise this individual and then vouch for them in a tribunal, they're going to be deported back to wherever, and they feel like they might have blood on their hands.
Well, I mean, the fact is that if they're going to be deported, that is a Home Office decision. It is not for anybody, clergy or layman, to interfere with that decision. And they can appeal to the courts. And if they've lost an appeal in the courts, he did finally win, but twice he was actually about to be deported. That is something else that the government needs to get a grip on. Why do we have multiple applications for asylum? One application. Yeah. One application. One appeal. That's it.
And that's it for us as well, I'm afraid. Thank you very much. Great to have you in the studio. That is, of course, the wonderful Anne Widdecombe. Now, coming up, it's a big hour for you, actually, because we've got Minister for Common Sense, Esther McVey, exclusively revealing what the woke brigade in the civil service, really running our country, what they're up to. Former GB News star is ready and waiting to go shortly, but I care very much about this. Are misogynistic values creeping their way into our civilised Western society? We've got chemical attacks, we've got honour killings, we've seen the lot. Where is this coming from? We know where it's coming from, and why aren't we stopping it? And a huge scoop in relation to the Church of England and fake asylum claims. You do not want to miss this hour on Patrick Christie's Tonight. We're only on GB News.